In today's video, we are going to see how to update the firmware of an ONU. For that, I have selected an HG323RGW ONU here. So let's see how we can update from the current firmware to a new firmware in this ONU. First, the ONU that we want to update should be connected to a computer or laptop. It can be connected through Wi-Fi, or we can connect it using a LAN cable. Here, I have connected the ONU using a LAN cable. I have connected a LAN cable from one of the LAN ports of the HG323RGW to my PC. After that, we need to assign an IP address to the computer's adapter. For that, go to the Ethernet settings. In the Ethernet settings, we need to assign an IP address in the same IP series as the ONU. For that, select the option Use the following IP address. The default IP of the ONU is 192.168.1.1. So we need to assign another IP in the 192.168.1.x series. Here, I have assigned 192.168.1.5. In the subnet mask field, just click once and it will automatically populate. Then click OK and again click OK and close it. After closing, open any web browser on the computer, such as Google Chrome or any other browser. Here, I have opened Google Chrome. In the URL bar at the top, we need to enter the ONU's default IP address, 192.168.1.1. When we enter the ONU's IP, the login interface will appear. Enter the username and password. The username will be admin. Enter the password that was set during login. Then enter the verification code and click Login. Now we are logged into the HG323RGW ONU. When we log in, the first page we see is the device information page under status. One important thing to note while updating firmware is that we must clearly understand the model of the ONU we are updating. There are different types and models of ONUs available, such as HG323RGW DAC, V2801SG, etc. So first identify whether the model is RGW or DAC. The next important thing is the hardware version. Based on the hardware version of the ONU, we need to choose the correct firmware file. Now this is an RGW ONU. The hardware version of this ONU is V3.6. Similarly, there can be versions like V3.7, V1.0, V3.2, etc. Each hardware version has its own firmware file. For example, for version 3.6, there is a specific file. For 3.7, there is another file. For 1.0, another. And for 3.2, another. The file for version 1.0 should never be used for 3.6 or 3.7. Similarly, the file for version 3.2 should not be used for 3.6 or 3.7. However, for versions 1.0 and 3.2, the same firmware can be used. Likewise, for 3.6 and 3.7, we can use the same file. If a separate firmware is released specifically for 3.6, it will be clearly mentioned in the file name. Now I will show an example by logging into the Netlink website. The website is netlinkxt.com. On that site, we can find the latest firmware files for our ONUs. We can download them from there. On the website, click on Know More, then click on Downloads. Close the pop-up message, then click on Click Here under Netlink Firmware. Accept the agreement. At the top, we can search for the ONU model for which we want the firmware. Enter the model name. Now we get firmware files suitable for HG323RGW. If we take the first file, it shows hardware version 3.7. The second file is for both 3.6 and 3.7. The third file is for 3.2 and 1.0. If a file is only for 3.7, it will be mentioned like that. The starting version of the firmware is also given. For example, in this ONU, the current firmware starts from version 2.0. Before updating, we must check the starting version of the firmware as well. The first file shown is only for 3.7 and its starting version is 3.0, not 2.0. The second file is suitable for both 3.6 and 3.7 and its starting version is 2.0. So before updating, we must clearly understand both the hardware version and the starting version of the current firmware. Now I have already downloaded the file. My current hardware version is 3.6 and the firmware starts from 2.0.1, 1.2 to 1201. I am now going to upload a newer file. The current file running is the second file. The latest file is 2.0.11.2 40425. So I am going to upload this file. First, download the correct firmware file. Then go to the ONU web interface. To update firmware, go to Management. If it times out, log in again. Then go to Management, then Device Management, and then Upgrade. Here we can choose the file to upload. Click on Choose File and select the downloaded file from the folder. Just select the file, do not open or extract it. Then click Start. A confirmation message will appear. Click OK. One important thing is that during the upload process, do not refresh the page or turn the ONU off and on. The upload and reboot will happen automatically. Do not manually reboot or power off the ONU. Just wait until the counting starts. After clicking Start, do not refresh or click anywhere else. Just wait. Now the counting has started. When it reaches 0, we can refresh the page. After refreshing, we need to log in again because the ONU reboots and the page closes automatically. Now the counting has reached 0. Refresh the page and log in again. Now the firmware has been updated to the latest version. This is how we upload firmware to an ONU. Always remember the key points. First, identify the correct ONU model. Then identify the hardware version. Based on the hardware version, choose the correct firmware file.